Looking back at our thriller opening, I feel that we did achieve what we set out to do and created a successful film. However, with the benefit of hindsight, there are several things that, given the time and more experience, we would have improved upon and changed. The main strength of a film that made it a fairly successful piece is present largely within the first scene. Our first scene was scripted quite simply. To make it more gripping, we tried to use visual techniques creatively. The entirety of the first scene was shot as a point of view, so narration is more restricted. It also means the action going on in the scene doesn't have to be clearly visualized. This made it easier for us to film, as with the framing, we only had to give the impression of the person being dragged without having to physically drag the actor across the ground. Visual editing was a key factor in making our opening more tense and interesting, and was another strength of our piece. Decision to have the visuals fade to black when the person was being dragged allows us to show that the victim is slowly regaining consciousness, which puts forward the idea that they have been badly hurt by this other character in the scene, and breaks up the footage so it wasn't just one long take and built up more tension. Use of filters in our visual editing was also something that was mentioned as being effective in our film. We made it so it distorted and discoloured the image, but it was only subtle to add the feeling that the victim has been hurt, and that it was more realistic for the audience as they are looking through the eyes of the victim. It allows them to sympathise with the character, which is a convention of thriller films. Something else we found that was strong in our film was our locations. Early on in our planning, we were able to organise suitable locations that we knew would be available to us when we were going to film. The Balkan Viaduct location in our first scene provided us with a large public area of land that was fairly secluded from the nearby town, so we could easily film it without any interference from the public, and we did not have to get permission. The viaduct itself provided a good landmark for our film to make the setting more interesting. For the second scene, one of the members of our group was happy to film in their house, and the layout of props with the furniture in the room allowed us to use a nice long pan shot, which I think is a nice shot, and it slows down the pace of our film from the first scene, and allows the audience to think about what just happened in the previous scene. Also, it easily establishes the new location. I think the variation of camera movement was another strength for our piece, as we used more movement in the first scene as there was more action happening. In the second scene, there are many more still shots at different angles used appropriately to show the change of pace and the lack of character movement. All the above points I think worked very well in our piece. However, there are still elements that have been commented on that require improvement. The main one being sound. Due to where we were filming, we could not control all the sounds in our environment. So for the entire first scene, the sound that was recorded with the footage on location had to be removed and replaced with sound effects from GarageBand. We did attempt to blend the sounds with the visual editing, so the sound effects went silent when the visuals faded to black. However, we encountered some problems due to our lack of experience using the program, so sounds were cut off quite sudden and not very fluid. Another issue concerning sound was the signal interference when the music in the radio was playing. I'm not sure when the sound issue occurred, as we recorded the sound straight from the radio. However, I think it was an error that occurred in the editing process due to the order in which we actually filmed the shots. In the second scene, we also had some slight framing issues with the character walking into the shot after the pan, as the head of the person was cut off slightly by the top of the frame. Also in the second scene, we had some problems due to the setting itself, with some reflection issues that still remain in our final piece because of the amount of reflected surfaces in the setting that we couldn't move. Also, there was a lack of natural lighting in the room, so we had to use the lighting kit, which worked well for most shots, but there was one in which it created an obvious shadow behind the character. Another thing that needed improvement in our work was the main title. People commented that our title was too short, and I agree with that. As well as the timing issue, there was a recurring problem with the sound being cut off quite sharply, and there was a sound effect to accent the titles, but due to the length of them, it was fairly abrupt. I feel it would have been better if the titles as well as the sound faded out. During the editing process, we were also toying around with the font for titles. We didn't want any extravagant lettering, but it was hard to find something we thought would be appropriate, so we ended up with a fairly simple font. So that's something I think we could have spent more time over and improved. Overall, I think the strength of our film made it a good piece of work, but the parts that require improving are easily picked up, and it does let it down.